can hear my fan, can you see? If you can hear that going on in the background, I do apologize. I said in my Fourth Wing video that I was going to be talking about this book because this book and Fourth Wing were both written in first person, and I was doing a comparison about how both books compared when written in first person, how the world building compared, and like how this had explanation, not expo dumping, and I didn't go into it like wholeheartedly, so there's not really anything that you have to worry about missing, and I'll cover that in here. But I'm here to talk about it because I finished this. This book was about 350 pages long. It's young adult, I believe, though reading it again as an adult, it could be for a younger age group than that, and I will explain why. So I read this book probably back when, well, I listened to it on audio. First of all, I wanna get that out of the way first. I listened to this book on audio back when I was maybe 14 or 15, and so it's been quite a few years, and I forgot the majority of what happened, but I remembered the basic parts of what were important and the major plot twist that made me fall in love with this book all those years ago. I will say that there are spoilers for this book, so the least spoilery I can tell you right now is that this book for me currently is sitting at about a 3.5. And that's because since I have read it, I don't think I'm going to read it again. I do want to read the other books in the series. It was good, but not as great as I remember. And I am going to explain that in the spoilery parts because I can't really talk about this book without spoiling it because this book is very spoilery. This book follows our main character, Sage. Sage is a boy, and he is an orphan. He's been running around the orphanages of the kingdom of Carthia, right here in the middle. Right here. The capital city is Drilliad. We spend most of the book at Farthenwood, which is actually an estate, not a town. So the Farthenwood estate, but we start in Kakar. I don't know. I'll put up the spellings here, maybe. That way you can see why I'm struggling with this. So the book is first person, written from the perspective of Sage, who is an orphan who's been running around. Sage, at the beginning of this book, has stolen some sort of roast, okay? And so he's stolen a roast to take back to the orphanage. And while he's doing that, he's being chased down by the butcher, which he stole the roast from. And he ends up getting tripped by a man sitting nearby, and he falls, and the butcher's gonna like chop off his hand, with a cleaver, as they do typically. And he is only stopped by this man who becomes our main antagonist. That man's name is Bevan Connor. And Bevan Connor is a nobility for the royals of Carthia. Now, Bevan pays for Sage. He buys Sage from the orphanage, and takes Sage and three other boys with him back to in the direction of his estate, Farthenwood. While they're on their way, they're kind of asking questions because Connor, they call him Connor, they don't call him Bevan, they call him Connor. Connor is elusive to the fact that he has this plan. Like he's bought them for a plan that he's forming, but he won't tell them what the plan is, and so they keep asking. He's like, I will tell you when you need to know. And they get to this campsite, and he's like, all right, I'm going to tell you what the plan is now because you're all that I need. I'm going to tell you. He tells them that the royal family, so the king, the queen, and the crown prince, are all dead. They have all died. They were all poisoned. And everyone reacts very poorly to this. The other three boys are from Carthia. Sage is from a neighboring kingdom called Avenia. So everyone, even Sage, who's not from this kingdom, takes this news very poorly. And Bevan is like, there is a second son of the royal family who allegedly was killed, but no one ever found his body. So no one knows if he's actually dead. So I'm going to make one of you pretend to be the prince. That way, Carthia doesn't fall into war, because Carthia is surrounded on two sides, and both of those countries are trying to come in and go to war. He's like, the only reason we can stop that is by putting someone on the throne. After he says this, he tells them that any if they want to leave, if they don't want to be a part of this plan, any of them can leave. And one of the boys is like, I don't want any part of this. I'm gonna go. And Connor says, okay, you can go. As the boy gets up to leave, Sage tries to warn him because somehow Sage knew. And there were a couple points in this that I am gonna make. This isn't an all positive review, mind you. But Sage is like, no, wait, but it's too late, and that boy is killed by Connor and Connor's men. And so Connor looks at them and he's like, obviously, I can't just let you all go. Now that you know the plan, any of you who want to go will have to go 6 feet under. None of the boys are quite happy with this because now that they understand that this isn't just like decide who's gonna be the prince. This is a fight for your life, essentially. Connor takes the 3 remaining boys, so it's Sage, Tobias, and I just read it too. Rodden. So Connor takes the remaining 3 boys, who are Sage, Tobias, and Rodden, Roden, a variation of the name Roden. He takes them to his estate in Farthingwood. Now, this book was 50 something chapters, but each chapter up until the very end was probably only 3.5 pages long, which isn't bad. I don't mind short chapters, and at the very beginning of this book, it was very easy and quick to get through, but then those short chapters just remained through the rest of the book, and we didn't really get explanations for a lot of stuff. We also didn't get a lot of description. So while there wasn't a whole bunch of heavy like lore and world building, which is completely unnecessary because we're supposed to be as clueless as our main character because this is first person, it did feel kind of, I don't want to say lazy because that's not the word. There was obviously a lot of thought put into this compared to the other books that I've read, but it just felt like there could have been more. Like there could have been more given to us. But as someone who writes, I understand trying to write in first person just not being able to find stuff to write about, when you're stuck in one person's head. The flip side to that is that when we get to Farthenwood, Connor has all 3 boys go through training to try and become the second prince, so Prince Jaren. And in doing so, they're learning to read and write, they're learning history, they're learning sword fighting, horseback riding, all the stuff Prince Jaren knew before his alleged death, And so they're learning all this stuff, and we get snippets of their lessons, but for the most part, Sage sleeps through most of it, which is fine, but it also shortens your chapters up significantly. So this wasn't a hard read by any means. It wasn't difficult to understand. There was multiple points where there would be like a line of dialogue and then the like following sentence like would be underneath that. So like dialogue would be said and then the dialogue tag would be a completely separate sentence underneath that. And so sometimes you would have dialogue going back and forth with no dialogue tags whatsoever. And so you just had to keep in your head that 2 people are talking and which was which. But then sometimes one character would say something and then their dialogue tag would be right under what they said. And then the next, like the following sentence would be the completely separate character. And so having like their dialogue and then their dialogue tag follow that would be really confusing because then you'd be sitting there like, wait, did I know this character said this, but why is their dialogue tag here? And then you would have to go back and like count back up and be like, no, that is correct. They did say this, but their dialogue tag is completely separate for some reason. It doesn't really make sense to me when that happens because if it is a dialogue tag or if it is an action following the dialogue, it should all be one sentence, especially when you aren't tagging all of your dialogue. So that was confusing to me and I didn't like that at all. The chapters in the middle were fine. They were pacey enough. They had mild action. I read this entire thing easily enough. I think I did stop at one point because I did get bored and I needed something to eat and then I came back to it. Like everything in the middle where they had 2 weeks. We covered the span of 2 weeks in probably a good, I don't know, 20 chapters. And all the chapters were like 3.5 to 4, maybe 5 pages long. And you could have given us more than that. Like, I know that he's sleeping through most of his classes, but I don't know if that's just because he really was that arrogant, or if Jennifer simply just didn't want to write the lessons happening, because I would have enjoyed that. I would have enjoyed a little bit more, because it felt kind of one note a lot of the time, and then a lot of the action was cut super short, and the mild romance didn't make any sense. And I'll explain what I mean by like the action. Bevan Connor is approached by one of the other, like, whatever you call people on a royal court. I don't remember the word for it. They said it. I don't remember. But he's approached by another one of the nobilities, and he makes the three boys go hide. And as they're hiding in the secret passages of the Farthenwood estate, Tobias tells Sage, "Oh, oops, I left papers in my mattress. If they find them, everyone's gonna die. Like, they're gonna kill us all." And so Sage is like, "All right, fine, stay here." And he goes and he runs to get the papers from Tobias's mattress. In the process of doing that, he uncovers a sword that he stashed a long time ago that we didn't know about, like, whatsoever. And then he goes to get the papers, gets the papers. The girl that he has interest in for some reason runs into the room that he's in that hasn't been searched yet, and she's trying to fend off some guard with a fire poker. And so Sage takes the sword that he grabbed for some reason, and he stabs the guard of the other noble and kills him, and then they just run back into the passageway. It was a very short, very condensed scene, and because it was so short, as a lot of the action scenes kind of were, it didn't really give you a lot of time to like sit and like process it and get like the thrill out of like the suspense of, oh no, what's gonna happen. It's not like this book was adverse to being like kind of graphic. They have one scene where Connor throws Sage into the dungeon and has him whipped, and Jennifer didn't hold back on that, but somehow the other scenes with kind of violence were very cut short. At the end of the book, Sage is fighting Rodin, and that fight scene was also very cut short, and the fight scenes in and of themselves weren't very descriptive, and I don't know if that's because they weren't supposed to be, or if because Jennifer didn't know how to describe them, but there wasn't a lot to imagine. Like, it didn't give you a lot of information to kind of picture like the fight scenes and picture the settings in general. There just wasn't a lot of like physical description. Another issue I had kind of was that this, while it isn't a romance book primarily, Sage does fall in love with one of the servant girls at Farthenwood, and it is kind of insta-lovey. Like, she serves him dinner on the first night, and he looks up at her, and she frowns at him, and he's instantly like enamored somehow. And I don't know why. It's not like she can be the only servant girl. There are women who are servants, but she's like the only girl somehow. Weird. And she doesn't talk to any other women ever. So it doesn't pass the Bechdel test, actually, believe it or not. Strange. I find that a little bit weird, Jennifer. Sage isn't disrespectful. It's not like, even though we're in the like perspective of like this boy, he isn't like objectifying her or anything. That's not the issue. The issue was that it was insta love, and they literally never had a conversation. The other thing was that it was kind of giving a little bit of saviorism, because, and this is the major spoiler, at the end of the book we discover that Sage actually is Prince Jaren, and he settles Imogen's debt with Connor before denouncing Connor. And so her debt to him is paid off. And it wasn't even her debt, it was like her family's debt. But once he figured that out, that's when Sage, aka Jaren, seemed to have interest in her. And he knew the entire time that he was Prince Jaren. And even though he knew the entire time he was Prince Jaren, we never knew he was Prince Jaren. And this book, I think, was supposed to be the unreliable narrator sort of trope, which was good. Like, reading it a second time after already knowing the twist, there were some things where I could point out and tell you, oh, hey, this might have been foreshadowing. But in the end, there wasn't really enough foreshadowing to really make this feel like an unreliable narrator. It just made it feel like it came out of actually nowhere. And then a lot of the stuff that happened at the very, very end of this book made it feel like it came out of absolute nowhere, because the end of this book wraps up in 2 chapters. Like, everything is fine in 2 chapters. There's this man who's the head of the royal court of advisors or whatever. They gave it a different name. I don't remember what they are. But the man in charge was really, really close to the king, and the king gave him a note before his death, apparently, allegedly. How convenient. And the note said, the true Prince Jaren will come to you with just a regular stone and tell you it's gold, and that's how you will know that he is Jaren. And that is just oh so convenient that just everything worked out in the end exactly how it was supposed to. Like, there were hardships, of course. I'm not gonna say that this book is anything like Powerless or Fourth Wing, where nothing ever went right. Sage is an absolute menace, okay? Sage is sarcastic and he's witty and he doesn't take crap from anybody, and I enjoyed that about him as a character. But at some point, you do kind of feel the irritation that the other characters are feeling, because he just won't shut his mouth, and just like, he has no survival instincts at some point. And I think that's because his cockiness comes from the fact that he knows that he is Prince Jaren. But I feel like we could have seen a little bit more, because, like I said, he steals a sword that is a replica, or a imitation, they called it, of Prince Jaren's sword. And he steals it and he stashes it away for later, and a whole bunch of other things that we actually never see. We never see him do this because it always cuts to a different chapter. Like, all of this happens when we, as the reader, are not around. So even if their narrator were unreliable, it's not that they were unreliable, it's just that they were downright kind of lying to us the entire time, because we never got to see him do any of these things. We could have seen him. He had this stone, the stone that he was supposed to, that he claims is gold. Yeah, that he's supposed to go claim his throne with, you know. The stone was stolen by Connor, and he ended up stealing the stone back at some point and stashed it in the river close to Farthenwood Estate. We could have seen that. Like, that wasn't something that needed to be omitted from us, because it could have been easily explained away by him going in and taking the stone and being like, I don't want Connor to have this, because then that means Connor owns me, and so I'm going to take it and I'm going to hide it where no one can find it. And then that's when we follow him to stash the stone in the river, and that would have been fine. That would have been completely explained away and it would have made sense. But all these things that sort of just happen, and you're like, oh, I guess that happened. Because we saw him at the river at one point, but that was after he was set loose on a horse that hadn't been trained. It was a wild horse, and he was set loose on it, and the horse just ran. We see him at the river at some point after the horses like bucked him off. We should have been able to see him at that point put the stone in the river at least, and kind of explain a little bit, because then your foreshadowing would have been actual foreshadowing, and not just something that happened while our backs were turned. The fact that he stole the sword, like, he told the guard that becomes his friend, Mott. He tells Mott, "Oh, the rubies in this like handle of this sword would fetch me a pretty penny." And Mott was like, "If you steal that sword, I'll like cut your hands off." And we could have seen Jaren as Sage take that sword and then hide it and be like, "This is my backup plan. If I need to get out of here, I'm gonna take this with the rubies and I'm gonna dip." And that would have explained that away while also being foreshadowing, while also explaining why he took it and hid it to begin with, without leaving kind of like these threads like up in the air. Because that was the thing. All of these threads kind of get explained away. Like they get explained in a way where you can kind of be like, "Oh yeah, we saw him at the river after the horse like bucked him off. That's when he put the stone down there. That makes sense." But we never see any of it. So honestly, everything that happened in this book, I can't really say happened. Like, I can't really tell you what exactly happened, except for the fact that they traveled from the orphanages to Farthingwood. They stayed at Farthingwood for 2 weeks. There was a raid by this other nobleman at some point, and then after that, they traveled directly to the castle where Jaren takes his rightful place as the king, and nothing ever really gets explained further than that. Jaren accuses Connor of killing his family by saying, "Oh, I was going through your library and I found all these books about poisons in your library, and then I found this vial of poison in your office. I know you killed my family. I am denouncing you and you were going to the prisons." We never saw him do that. We knew he had snuck out at night, but we never saw what he was doing. Like the chapter would always end and the next one would always start when he woke up the next morning. It is so easy, especially with the length of these chapters, to write a chapter of him sneaking out and going through the library because he isn't supposed to be a good reader. Like, as his alter ego Sage. Sage isn't a good reader, but he's a good enough reader. And so we could have had him just sneak out to the library and be walking through the shelves and come around this section that's just about poisons and be like, "Huh, that's weird. Why would someone have a section in their library just for poisons?" And then that would kind of explain why and how he figured it out, because that came out of nowhere. There was one mention of the nobility being at the dinner where the king and queen and crown prince were poisoned, because they were allegedly poisoned at dinner and then went to bed and then just never woke up. There was one mention of it. And so the fact that Jaren comes out with this, "Hey, I found this book," and "Hey, I found this bottle of like vial of poison in your palace. You killed my family." The fact that he comes up with that out of nowhere and we didn't see any build up to that was just kind of something that was tossed in, and it felt very last minute and kind of very haphazard. And so while I do like this book, there's just a lot of things that could have been changed about it to kind of make it make more sense. Because there wasn't a whole lot of like plot holes necessarily, because everything is wrapped up in the end, but there's just a lot of like threads that were tied with other threads, but they're not the same thread. So all the loose threads were tied, just not tied with their correct counterparts. With that being said, that's pretty much the only things I can really say about this book, because I didn't hate it. I liked the characters. I liked all three boys, even though Sage was our main character. I liked seeing their different personalities and watching them. And I think what was interesting was that this book wasn't all first person. There was at least 2 chapters of Sage's origin story, which were third person, and it was him kind of recounting the story of him and his father, and that was told in third person until the very end, when he was like, "That's when I stopped being Jaren and became Sage," or whatever, and you kind of realize that, oh, that was kind of him like replaying it as a third party in his own head, you know what I mean? Which was kind of cool. Other than that, I probably will read the other books in this series just to give you guys like a full series breakdown on them all, because I think the second book is about pirates, like being the pirate king or something, if I remember correctly, which sounds right up my alley. Yes, thank you. But other than that, this is proof that I can read books and enjoy them. This is your proof. It might be young adult, but technically so is Powerless. Technically. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that this was mildly insightful for you, and if not, go ahead and leave any questions you have about this down below. I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but technically now that I've talked about it, it is spoiled for you, but I would still go suggest reading it. It's not a long read, it's not a hard read. I ended up reading it in probably 3.5 to 4 hours, the entire thing, just today before I came to you. I enjoy this book, and if you haven't read it, I hope I have given you a reason to, and if you have read it, I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this. But that being said, I will see you all later. Bye.